know the why human trafficking work is needed, to fight for the freedom of modern-day slaves. But love, passion, commitment isn't all you need to be an effective and successful anti-trafficking advocate. Learn the how. I'm Dr. Celia Williamson, Director of the Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute at the University of Toledo. Welcome to the Emancipation Nation podcast, where I'll provide you with the latest and best methods, policy, and practice discussed by experienced experts in the field so that you can cut through the noise, save time, and be about the work of saving lives. Welcome to the Emancipation Nation. This week we have Dr. Kirby Reuter, and he is on the front lines of trafficking, and I mean literally on the front line. He works close to the Mexican border. He works a lot with immigrants who are seeking political asylum, who are refugees, and he is right there understanding a lot about human trafficking in terms of international victims who are often brought into the country and trafficked into the labor of the sex trade. So thank you so much, Dr. Reuter, for being here today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for letting me have the opportunity. I also appreciate this.
Yeah, so Dr. Reuter he's bilingual. He's a clinical psychologist and licensed in both Texas and Ohio. He's done lots of presentations, has 13 years of clinical experience. He's certified in psychotherapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, the EMDR. He's published. He knows a lot about trauma and coping. He's appeared on Spanish radio. He's done a TED Talk on the effects of human trafficking on both the brain and society. So he's going to talk to us about what he does in his job to help international asylum seekers. So my first question, I have so many questions, but I guess my first question is, what exactly do you do as a clinical psychologist in that area?
Sure. So I contract with the Department of Homeland Security to provide mental health treatment services for immigrants that are seeking political asylum. Mm-hmm. The majority of the people that I work with come from throughout Latin America, so ranging from Mexico all the way down to Brazil. I would say the majority of the people we work with are coming from Central America. Mm. So my main job is to meet with everyone on my caseload. So that could range from 75 to sometimes up to 100 mothers and minors that are seeking political asylum on a weekly basis. So that's a lot of people to touch base with. And then if necessary or requested, I do trauma work. Mm-hmm. Because as you can imagine, the vast majority of these people have been extensively traumatized from childhood, in adulthood, and then especially the trip. The trek they make to get to the border.
I want to ask you about that, but before we even do that, how did you get to the border? Like where were you working before, and what was the process of you focusing your clinical practice on this population?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was originally a Spanish major in college. So that brought me to Mexico. I spent 2 years in Mexico in my early 20s. And I married someone from Mexico. So I had 2 years of exposure to what goes on in a lot of these countries that most Americans are completely oblivious to. So yeah, I had firsthand exposure to a lot of what I'm now working with at a professional level.
Mm. And then did you just simply apply for the job or did you even have your sights on, I want to go down and work near the border and help people. How did that even come about?
I was recruited for the position.
Okay. And where were you previously?
I spent 7.5 years in the Midwest. So I worked at a residential facility in rural Indiana, just outside the Fort Wayne area. So not too far from Toledo, maybe a couple hours from Toledo. So that was actually my first major gig in the mental health field, was doing residential work for adolescents. And that was also my first exposure to trafficking at a professional level. Some of our adolescents that ended up with us in residential had clearly been trafficked.
Yeah. And so kind of the job you do now was a perfect setup, because you now work with moms and minors, and also provide some kind of residential setting for them. But what kind of things do you see when you talk about people coming across the border and having trauma? What kind of trauma?
Yeah, the trauma is almost endless. So starting in childhood, a lot of the adults I work with, when they were kids back in their countries, they received extensive physical, emotional, verbal, sexual abuse, you name it. I've had residents that I've worked with that have reported having been beat on a daily basis with horsewhips. And that's just in their childhood. So not surprisingly, a lot of these young ladies leave the house as soon as they can. So a lot of them are entering into adult relationships at ages, 14, 15. And of course, that's a lot of times when the next round of trauma starts to happen, because now they're being abused, not by parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles, but now they're being abused by a domestic partner. So obviously not in every case, but in many cases they are. And so once again, the emotional, the verbal, the physical, and a lot of times even the sexual abuse continues well into adulthood. And that's just what's going on at home. Then you factor in gang violence. I've worked with residents who have told me that unwittingly, so they didn't know, but they had entered into a romantic relationship with someone that turned out to, work for the narcos, the cartels. I have had a few residents tell me that they married the most wonderful person ever. And it's just in my experience, those are the types of people that end up getting murdered by the cartels.
Oh, wow.
So that's another level of trauma. So a lot of them have had their partners, either they were abused by their partners or their partners have been murdered, or close family members have been murdered by the cartels. So siblings, their own kids. And then, so, a lot of the vast majority of the times, that's what they're fleeing. That's what they're trying to get away from. So they've either directly witnessed a violent murder, or someone they know has been murdered. And of course, if someone they know has been murdered, or if they've been an eyewitness of a murder, they're the next target.
Yes.
So, one resident told me that she saw someone get decapitated live. But she saw it with her own eyes. And of course, the gang members knew that she saw it with her own eyes. So she knew she was next. So that's what's prompting their trips north to the border. But then, as if all of that's not enough trauma, the trip to the border itself is inherently extremely traumatizing. It takes weeks, sometimes months to make this trip. A lot of times it's lots of walking, sometimes through the mountains. They sometimes can spend entire days without eating, sometimes without sleeping. I've heard stories of people sleeping up in the mountains and literally having rattlesnakes crawl over them in the middle of the night, completely exposed to the elements. But that's just nature. They're also exposed to all of the cartel shenanigans that happen in Mexico. They're really easy targets. In Mexico, it's really easy to figure out who is not a native Mexican, who's a Central American or someone from another country that's making the trek through Mexico. They're very easily identified by both cartels, but also by Mexican immigration.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times they're kidnapped on the trip, and while they're kidnapped, a lot of times they are sexually assaulted. Sometimes the kids are sexually assaulted right in front of the mothers. Sometimes the mothers are sexually assaulted right in front of the kids.
Oh my God.
If they have any cash on them, obviously that is stolen. So they are stripped of all possessions. Chances are they don't have too many. But if they have some cash or a phone or whatever, that's gone. Sometimes they're literally stripped even of their clothes. And, a lot of times they're held hostage in some random building. And there'll be an entire group of, say, 50 people in a room. They'll basically say, okay, unless you can cough up 10 grand, you're gone. And of course, they don't have 10 grand. So they desperately reach out to contacts, back in their country or contacts in the U.S. to try to get the money together. And if they don't, they're just gone. So I heard one story of a mother, father, and a child that were held hostage. And, every few hours, someone was removed from the room and didn't return. And it wasn't because they were released. It was because they weren't able to come up with the money. And so this particular family, with their contacts, they were able to come up with enough money for the mother and the child. Well, actually not quite enough. But the cartels have enough sense to, if we kill everyone, we don't make any money. So they had enough money to be released, but they didn't have enough money for the dad. And so, by the time the mother and the child made it to us, nobody knew what happened to dad.
Wow.
So, part of the trauma that's also happening is, families are separated in the process. So, mothers have no idea where their kids are or their spouses are. By the time they're apprehended and processed, another layer of trauma that adds to the complexity here is that in Mexico, the immigration officials and the cartels are in complete cahoots. So it really doesn't matter who you end up getting targeted by, right? Yeah. If you get apprehended by immigration, of course, they're going to charge you all kinds of fees for this and that. But really what they're doing is they're also sizing up who you know, how much capital you have access to, et cetera. So that when they're released by immigration, they're immediately reapprehended by a cartel who now knows all the information about them.
Yes, and that you have access to resources. And so if there's also situations, I think if you are lucky enough that you leave all your possessions behind, so you don't have anything, you've borrowed money, correct? Make it to the border. But then if you're turned away, you now owe this debt, correct? That you can't pay back.
No, yeah, you're absolutely correct. So to finance this journey, it is very expensive because you have to hire some kind of coyote or, some kind of guide, so to speak. And yeah, they do not charge cheaply. So yeah, a lot of times it is $5,000, $10,000, a lot of times per head, just to make this kind of journey. So obviously they don't have that cash saved up if they're already living in poverty. So sometimes they have a family acquaintance that can take out a loan from the bank on their behalf, or sometimes they get a private loan from who knows who. But basically, they've leveraged their entire lives. They've banked everything on this because they've left all their possessions. A lot of times to get a loan from a bank, if they do have a house, the house is collateral. So they literally have nothing to go back to. They have the clothes on their backs, and this huge debt.
Wow.
So if their asylum is not approved, and they're deported back, not only don't they have any material possessions to fall back on, but they, in addition to all that, they now need to face the people that they have fled in the first place.
Yes.
Right. So if they were witness to some kind of violent crime or whatever, but in addition to all that, how in the world are they going to pay off this debt?
Yes.
Which makes them extremely vulnerable to trafficking. So I asked one young lady that she didn't get her loan from a bank. She got it from some kind of private acquaintance. And I said, was this a family friend or friend? And she said, no, not really, just someone that had the cash. I said, well, if you get deported, how are you going to pay that back? And whenever I ask that question, they just hang their head and they say, I have no idea. And in this case, since she didn't even really know this person, I was especially concerned. And I said, what is this guy going to do to you when you can't pay him back? And she said, I don't know. It was kind of odd when I was talking with him because the man repeatedly said, if you can't pay this back, I'm not sure what's going to happen to you. But he said it as a threat.
Yeah.
So in other words, she knows if she goes back, there are conditions, there are strings attached to not being able to pay that debt. And those strings are probably some kind of forced prostitution.
And even the people that may get through and be considered, a refugee in the U.S., are they also vulnerable?
Yeah, in my opinion, they are. If they have a sponsor that's a close family member or someone that they know well and trust, then they are much less vulnerable. But if, and this happens, if, the only person that's going to vouch for them is someone that they met on Facebook 3 weeks ago, then every red flag goes off in my head. Because they have this big debt that they have to pay off, and they have no way of providing for themselves in this country, don't know the language, and the person that's supposedly going to sponsor them is someone they just met on the internet.
Yeah, and is that pretty common?
Fortunately, I would say that's probably the minority of the cases, but it does happen.
Okay.
But even if they have a trusted sponsor, they are still vulnerable to trafficking, because their sponsor might be someone that doesn't even have that's not even fully acclimated to this country either. It might be a close family member that's just barely started their own immigration process and maybe doesn't know the language. Or maybe a family member that actually probably cannot support them very well financially. So they're still at risk, especially if they're going to a major city.
Wow. And so you have approximately a caseload of maybe 75 to 100 of these people in desperate situations that you see every week, right?
Yeah.
And so the people that are in these situations stay at the center, the processing center. And how long do they stay there? What range of time while the U.S. is deciding whether they come in the country or whether they're deported back to their country? How long's that time span?
Yeah, before June of this year, the asylum seekers were only at the facility for about 2 weeks. Their cases were being processed very quickly, and the vast majority were receiving positives. But in June of this year, there was lots of legislation enacted that's been a huge game changer. So a lot of them are at the facility for up to a few months, before their cases are finally adjudicated.
Okay.
So especially if they receive a negative, an appeal, that kind of prolongs the process.
And so as they're there now for months, do they have the opportunity to see you, a clinical psychologist, on a regular basis?
Yep. So we run a mental health clinic right on site. So there's maybe 20 of us providers. And the mental health clinic is open every single day. And so, yeah, once a week, we have to meet with everyone on our caseload, even if it's only for a few minutes, just to check in to make sure everything's okay. But we also explain that we have a mental health clinic on site that they can access at any time. So, even if I'm not physically present on site, then someone else can see them. But they do know my schedule. So they know which days I'm going to be there. And yeah, a lot of times, I would say a minority of the residents actually seek out mental health services. The rest are either in too much shock, maybe lots of denial, or they simply do not trust us. And I mean, for good reason. I can see why, especially after how they've been treated by Mexican immigration. They're not going to just open up. But a lot of times, they're also terrified that we are somehow in cahoots with the cartels.
Yes, I can see how
which of course we're not.
Yeah.
But up to this point, they've never been able to trust someone in a public office or someone that represents the government. So back in their countries, they don't go to the police to report this kind of stuff. Why? Because, the police chief is also the brother-in-law of, the local cartel leader.
And so how do you, seeing this, being entrenched in it day in and day out every week, what do you do to take care of yourself and try to avoid suffering vicarious trauma?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, fortunately, I'm able to do this 3 days a week. So that means I have 4 days a week to recover and do other things, including a small practice that involves clients without such intense needs. And also, since the facility is about 2.5 hours from where I live, I can compartmentalize. So 3 days a week, I just camp out. That's where I am. That's what I'm doing. Then when I come back to civilian life, so to speak, it's a different world. So I'm able, I have that 2.5 hour commute to make that transition. But what really helps me is re-engaging with my family. I love to play with my kids. So we go to the park a lot. We play tennis. We play soccer. We jump on the trampoline. We play board games, card games. Sunday is for church and family. So that's a really good reset button for me.
Good.
Going on walks with my wife, watching the news in the evening with my wife. That all helps. I know those are simple things. But I would say the way that this work does affect me is, well, one, in a good way, because it's an automatic attitude adjustment every single week, because every single week I realize I am a spoiled brat of an American and I have nothing to complain about.
Yes, it's the simple things, I think, of being able to take a walk and being able to go in your home and watch the news and sleep in a nice bed, and those things you begin to appreciate after you go and see what life is like for some people. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So it does help me appreciate, infinitely more my own relationships, especially with my family. But I would say the way that it negatively affects me is, I realize I'm a spoiled brat of an American and I have nothing to complain about. But that doesn't mean everyone else I interact with in my life has had that particular attitude adjustment that I have had.
Yes.
So I just do not have patience for what other people complain about. I just don't. Sometimes even in my own family, it's like, no, that is not an issue. You have no idea the horror stories I have just heard the last 40 hours. And no, sorry, that's not. So sometimes I'm not as empathic and as validating as I should be when I re-enter my civilian world.
Right. You want to say first, those are first world problems. Like, you'll be okay.
Yes, exactly.
And so, Kirby, how do people get in touch with you if they want more information, if they're interested in perhaps having you present or just learning more information, or they'd like to be the type of clinical psychologist that you are? How do they get in touch with you?
Sure. I have a non-government related professional email address that people are more than welcome to contact me at. So that is Kirby.Reuter, Reutter, at gatewaywoods.org. So that's all one word in plural, Gateway Woods. But I also do lots on social media, so people are more than happy to track me down through LinkedIn.
Okay. And Kirby is Kirby, not Bey, right?
Yep, correct. Kirby. Yep.
And then you also have a TED Talk that people could go and listen to. And I understand that you have a book. What's the name of your book?
It's a self-help book for survivors of trauma. It's called Dialectical Behavioral Therapy Skills Workbook for PTSD, Practical Exercises for Overcoming Trauma and Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. So basically, it's DBT for PTSD.
Okay. And where can people pick up the book?
It's available on Amazon.
Okay. Excellent. Kirby, thank you so much for everything that you do, for being right on that front line. Is there anything that you want to share with the audience of advocates who are trying to fight this cause as well?
Well, really, I would like to thank you for everything you're doing, and especially that conference you have in Toledo. I've been to it twice. In fact, that was kind of my first primer on this whole topic of human trafficking.
Excellent.
So you opened up a whole new world for me. So that's what I would recommend to other people is attend your conference in Toledo.
Yes, thank you. I think that's awesome because I would love people to attend the conference and learn more. And thank you for sharing that. The conference opened up a part of you that ended up in you being at the border and helping people with their trauma, because that's awesome. So thank you so much, Dr. Reuter. I really appreciate your time, and good luck to you, and keep that balance of self-care that you need so much so that you can do the great work that you do.
Thank you, Celia. I really appreciate the time.
Wow, Dr. Kirby Reuter figured out how he could use his skills, his clinical skills, his Spanish-speaking skills, to help some of the most vulnerable in society. And then he took himself to the border, to ground zero, to help and provide compassionate care. People like Kirby, I have to take my hat off to, because people like that usually have two types of beliefs. One is that the future can be better than the present, and number two, I can do something about it. And so some would say that Dr. Kirby has an impossible dream. Remember that? To fight the unbeatable foe, to bear with unbearable sorrow, to run where the brave dare not go, to reach the unreachable star. Take care of yourself, Dr. Kirby. We're with you. In 2020, I'm going to begin offering online courses, workshops, so that if you desire to be involved more fully in the realm of social justice and anti-trafficking work, there will be opportunities for you to get involved. So pay close attention. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And I'll be sending you information throughout the year, of course, about the annual Human Trafficking and Social Justice Conference, and also about any courses or workshops or materials that we may be releasing in 2020. Thank you again, Dr. Reuter, for all that you do. You're amazing, and please, please, please take care of yourself. Let's not just do something, let's do the best thing. If you like this episode of Emancipation Nation, please subscribe, and I'll send you the weekly podcast. Until then, the fight continues.